A two-manifold is a thin piece of surface, like this piece of paper or this piece of thin plastic. But a two-manifold must not have any branches. A book that has many pages but has a spine where they all come together, that would not qualify as a two-manifold. But even a weird thing like that would qualify as a two-manifold. Two-manifold may have borders, such as this Mobius band, or it may have holes like this particular Klein bottle, or it may be completely closed like this surface of an icosahedron or the shell of an egg. Now for topologists, all objects are made of infinitely stretchable rubber. And so the geometry really doesn't matter. And if I deform this Mobius band, it stays a Mobius band, and the topologist would still classify this in exactly the same way as the original shape. From this point of view, all of these two manifolds can be classified by just 3 integer numbers. The first one is the number of borders. This particular Mobius band has just a single border. I can run my finger around the border here, and if I go around the loop twice, I'm coming back to where I started.
So this is like the edge.
This is the edge of the thin surface. This particular plastic piece has 2 borders. One is the circular here, and the other one is this particular edge here.
So this is the part where if an ant was crawling on it, it would cut itself in half.
That's right. And if we look at this piece of paper, this one has 3 borders. One is the rectangular frame on the outside, and then we have a circular border here and sort of a kidney-shaped border over on this particular case. So this is the first number. The second number is the sidedness of a surface. So this piece of paper is clearly two-sided. As a matter of fact, it has a blue side and it has a white side, and you cannot get from one side to the other without crawling over this very sharp edge where an ant would cut itself to death. The Mobius band, on the other hand, has a single side. If you start painting and spreading your paint without ever crossing one of the edges, you would come around and you would notice that by the time you're done, you have actually painted both sides of this particular surface. So that's a single-sided surface with a single edge. On the other hand, the Klein bottle here is also a single-sided surface, but as you can see, it has no edges. However, we cannot really create a completely closed Klein bottle in 3-dimensional space without having either some openings, some punctures, or a self-intersection line. And you can see here is one of those self-intersection lines. Now, if I don't like these self-intersection lines, I could cut a slightly larger hole into the wall of the thick arm so that the thin arm then can be passing through. So in this model, rather than living with the self-intersection, I have cut a large enough opening into the green body so I can bring out the thin arm without creating a self-intersections, but for the price of creating an opening, a so-called puncture, which has its own border. So this would still be a Klein bottle, but now it is a Klein bottle with one puncture. There's an important message here, and that means that simple holes that you cut in a surface do not change the type of surface for a topologist. Even though this little thing has a whole lot of little holes, it would still be considered a Klein bottle, but with many, 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 many punctures. Now, from that point of view, this little cylinder is really just a sphere with 2 punctures. And this becomes a little bit more obvious if you try to cap off these openings. So we put sort of a cap on here. Now it would be a sphere with only 1 puncture. And by the time I'm adding the second cap, it becomes sort of more obvious that this is topologically just a sphere. There is a third number that is important for the classification of all two manifolds, and that has to do with the connectivity of the surface. It's called the genus of a surface. A sphere, or equivalent topological shapes, would be of genus 0. A donut would be of genus 1. A 2-hole donut would be of genus 2. And here is a more complicated object, and the surface of that would also be a 2-manifold of genus 2. The genus is clearly related to how many holes you have in your donut or how many handles that there are. A more precise definition would be how many closed loop lines can you draw on that surface that if you were to cut along them, the surface would still hang together. If I take my piece of paper, cut a circular loop into it, then the inner part of that hole falls out and is clearly no longer connected. On the other hand, if I take my simple torus and I cut along this red line, then I simply get some kind of, tubing, but it still all hangs together. So this is of genus 1 because I draw one such line. If I had a 2-hole torus, I could draw 2 such lines, and I can cut along those, and after both those cuts, the surface still all hangs together. So that's a surface of genus 2. If I take my Mobius band and I'm cutting along that red line, I maintain that this Mobius band will not fall apart. Now, what do I get? I get a loop twice the size. It has a twist of 360 degrees in it, but it is still in one piece. And since I could do one such cut, that means that Mobius band had a genus of 1. Try to cut it again in the middle, then it actually would fall apart. There's only one way of cutting the Mobius band along a line, and then we're done. To see whether it's not perhaps genus 2. Here. Now I've 2 individual pieces, and I cannot get from one piece to the other, so the surface is no longer connected. So clearly Mobius band is only genus 1. The Klein bottle is actually of genus 2, and I've tried to indicate that by drawing 2 such lines, which I could cut along, the red line on the one side and the green line on the other side, and if I did that, the surface would still be hanging together. So the Klein bottle is a single-sided surface with no borders, and it is of genus 2. Now I would like to make better Klein bottles of a higher genus. Now, how could we do that? I would like to build these super Klein bottles in some modular way. The first possible way of making a module is what I'm showing here. I'm essentially taking the top half of the classical Klein bottle that has the important mouth. The way it is, this is still a 2-sided surface. To make that clear, I essentially painted the inside here in silver, so the inside of this green toroidal body is silvery, and then it is being brought out here in this silvery stem, which by itself on the inside is still green. I want to use 2 of these modules to make my super Klein bottle, and I'm contemplating on essentially bringing them together into a ring and then need these curved connectors. But you can see if I try to put them together like that, then silver meets silver in the upper branch, and green meets green in the lower branch. And so I never really step from green to silver, and so that cannot possibly be a single-sided surface. It's a perfectly good, 2-sided surface. But what if I turn this thing around? So maybe I want to connect it like that. And let me actually try to do that. Some assembly required. So now I have created this contraption. And it looks good, I'm getting from green to silver over this branch. But then wait, if I go through lower branch, I get once more a green-silver transition. And that means I have an even number of changes between the 2 surfaces. And so I'm not really getting a net single-sided surface. So again, it's 2-sided. That's disappointing. Maybe we can put 3 of those into a loop. So here you can see a loop of 3 of those Klein bottles. We have 3 transitions. Clearly, it's an odd number of transitions between the surfaces, so the whole thing is single-sided. But if we analyze it in details, we find that the genus is still only 2. So there's really nothing new over the ordinary Klein bottles. So maybe we should make something more complicated. What do we need to do in order to get a super Klein bottle of higher genus? Nothing seems to really work. Well, in order to get this done right, we need to do what mathematicians call a connected sum of 2 or more Klein bottles. You start with 2 ordinary Klein bottles, and then you cut the puncture in each one of them. You connect those 2 openings with an umbilical cord. And now if we do that, we actually get a single-sided surface of genus 4. Here is my simple Klein bottle, But now I've sort of added this branch with a puncture, and here is another Klein bottle with a puncture. And if I put the two together, now I have what I call the first super bottle, which is a surface of genus 4. The crucial thing was to create this extra branch here that allows me to have this component coupled into another component, and this is a modular component that now allows me to make higher genus Klein bottles, or what I call super bottles. So truly now this is a single-sided surface of genus 4 with 2 punctures, because that's what I need if I want to see this thing in 3-dimensional space.
But in 4 dimensions, this would work.
In 4 dimensions, I could do it without those self-intersections. Right? Here is a more compact version of one of those genus 4 single-sided surfaces. There are clearly many possible ways of creating such a branching Klein bottle module, and I wanted to be this as general as possible to make many different sculptures. And so I have chosen to use this particular version, which has the 3 arms come out in 3 mutually orthogonal directions. By doing that, I can then put 8 of those around the corners of a cube frame, but even this special cube corner component can be done in quite a few different ways. This is one of my first modules. Then I have made another module, and here's the third module, and they all have one thing in common. The ends of the arms come out in 3 mutually perpendicular directions, and they all have the same distance from the end of the arm to the center of the 3 intersection lines. So they all can replace one another, and then put them in arbitrary ways around the corners of a cube to make a modular super bottle based on a cube frame. They're quite different, but they're so similar in style. I have made sure all of them rely essentially on one toroidal body somehow that makes them belong to the same family. But in some instances, you can see here I'm branching out the thick part, where in this case I'm feeding out the thinner tube, and then the thinner tube is the one that branches in 2. And in the third module, the thinner tube branches in 2, but the actual branching occurs on the inside of the module. Each one of these different modules can go in different places, and each one of them can be rotated in 3 different positions. A few additional curved elements, I can make different shapes. For instance, a 3-sided prism. This is a version where I have a fairly regular prism by adding 3 pieces of curved branches that each one turn through 30 degrees. Here's a different version where rather than having 3 inserted pieces, I have 2 pieces of 45 degrees to make this, somewhat less regular triangle. And then I just copy 2 of these triangles behind one another, and I get something that looks a 3-sided prism. Another option is curves that curve through 39 degrees, and then in this I can use 4 of my modules and 6 of those bent pieces, and I get something that emulates a tetrahedral frame, a super bottle of genus 6, whereas this here was a super bottle of genus 8. Of course, once I had all these parts lying around, I was just playing, and here are a few more fancy shapes that are much less regular. So the inventiveness now has no limits, with enough parts lying around. If we introduce a new Klein bottle module that actually has a 4-way branch, then one 4-way branch gives us the same increase in connectivity that we would get from 2 3-way branches. With only 6 of those 4-way branches, I can make a super bottle of genus 14.
Wow, that's genus 14.
I also did something a little bit special. In one of these branches, I pulled the inside of the toroid out into this funnel-shaped thing, so it can serve as a stand of this particular sculpture.
But that's still... The stand is part of the topology. You haven't broken,
The stand would simply be one more puncture that this particular module has, and as we saw before, adding punctures does not change the genus of a surface. The classification would not change because of that. This is one that uses 5 of those parts, and here's another one that uses 6 of those parts. But of course, we can also combine the 3-arm modules and the 4-arm modules. If I combine 8 of my 3-way parts with 6 of my 4-way parts, I get this, what I would almost call a super-duper bottle. And this one now is of genus 22, and it is based on the frame of a rhombic dodecahedron. What if I want a single-sided surface of genus 7? The key thing is to start with a Mobius band. as a building block because the Mobius band has only genus of 1. So as you add Mobius bands together, you can increment the genus 1 by 1. So here is a Mobius band of a quite different shape, and I would have to cut some hole in it in order to be able to graft it onto something else. Now here's a component where I have already done that. Here again, you see almost the same shape in the Mobius band, but then here at the bottom, here is the hole that we're using now for grafting. 2 of those components and graft them onto one another. I have added genus 1 plus genus 1, that's genus 2, and so you should know what that is. If you've seen some of the other videos on Klein bottles, you know 2 Mobius bands together make a Klein bottle of genus 2. Now, to get to even higher genus, I would use a third component. I would have to graft a third component onto this combination, and then I would have a single-sided surface of genus 3. Now, if you know that you want to make genus 7, what you need to do is find a sphere, drill 7 holes into it, and then simply graft one of these punctured Mobius strips on each one of the 7 holes. And voila, you get yourself a genus 7 single-sided surface. And this works for any positive integer number.
What did you eat for breakfast? Something sort of Swiss or something?
7 or 8 Klein bottles.
For breakfast?
You know, like bagels, you know, those Klein bottles are so much tastier.
What do Klein bottles do?
Well, they
digest them.
They digest fast because you digest from the inside and from the outside.
All right.